Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Exactly.
So I want you to imagine hacking into the password-protected, completely private digital diary of the single most powerful human being on the face of the planet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. You bypass the encryption, you open the files, and you're fully expecting to find, the secrets of the universe.
Brand geopolitical strategy or something.
Exactly. You expect these multi-dimensional chess moves or this definitive manifesto on how to crush your enemies and get infinite wealth.
Yeah.
But instead, you open the first document, and the entry literally just says, please, for the love of everything, do not let annoying people ruin my morning today.
It's so relatable.
It is. And today, we are undertaking a really fascinating mission for this deep dive. We're unpacking books 7 and 8 of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
A class.
Right. And if you have ever felt, completely overwhelmed by the demands of your day, or just frustrated by the sheer incompetence of the people around you.
Which is everyone at some point.
Exactly. Or if you've just felt this creeping heavy sense of burnout or imposter syndrome, this exploration is entirely for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what we are looking at are the unedited, deeply private thoughts of a Roman emperor who is not, trying to sound smart for an audience.
Right, he's just trying to survive his own life.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, it really is the ultimate historical juxtaposition, because to truly understand the weight of books 7 and 8, we have to establish the physical and psychological reality of the Roman Empire during his reign.
Right, late 2nd century.
Yeah, late 2nd century. Marcus Aurelius was not sitting in some quiet, marble-floored, air-conditioned villa writing a best-selling self-help book.
Like getting a modern publishing deal or something.
Exactly. He was writing these specific passages in military tents, literally freezing in the mud on the Danubian frontier. Wow.
He was dealing with the Antonine plague, which was actively devastating the global population. He was managing these grueling, endless wars with Germanic tribes.
Just constant pressure.
Constant. And on top of all that, he was navigating, the betrayals of his own trusted generals and the exhausting, venomous politics of the Roman court.
That sounds miserable.
It was. He had the blood, the mud, and the sheer crushing weight of millions of human lives resting squarely on his decisions every single morning.
Wait, let's pause on that context for a second, because I think it's so easy to hear words like plague and war and just kind of gloss over them as generic historical background noise.
Yeah, just stuff that happened in the past.
Right. For those who might not remember their Roman history, just how bad was the Antonine plague? Are we talking about a localized outbreak or something world-altering?
Oh, we are talking about an apocalyptic event by ancient standards.
Yeah, historians generally believe it was either smallpox or measles, and it was brought back to the Roman Empire by troops returning from campaigns in Parthia, so modern-day Iran and Iraq.
Okay.
The physician Galen actually documented it, describing these horrifying symptoms like fever, diarrhea, inflammation of the pharynx, and skin eruptions.
Ugh, that sounds awful.
It was incredibly virulent. At its height, it was reportedly killing up to 2,000 people a day in Rome alone.
Wait, 2,000 a day just in Rome?
Just in Rome. Entire towns and villages in the Italian peninsula and the provinces were completely abandoned. They just fell into ruin.
That's unimaginable.
The Roman army was so decimated that Marcus actually had to recruit gladiators and slaves to fight on the frontiers.
Wow.
Yeah, we're talking about a mortality rate that wiped out an estimated 5 million people, potentially up to a third of the population in some areas.
A third. So death was just everywhere.
Everywhere. State collapse felt completely imminent. That is the backdrop here.
See, that fundamentally changes how you read these pages.
It really does.
When you realize the absolute apocalyptic scale of the crisis he's managing, the text stops sounding like this, privileged philosophy lecture.
Right.
The audience here is an audience of one. Because he isn't writing to instruct us. He's literally writing to keep himself from completely breaking down.
Precisely. The core problem we have to understand is that Marcus is actively wrestling with his own mind.
Yeah.
He's wrestling with his deep frustrations with other people's incompetence, their malice, and his own sheer exhaustion.
Which makes sense given what he was facing.
Exactly. If you read Meditations without that context, it can sometimes sound, preachy or detached.
It's a little cold, maybe.
Yeah, a little cold. But when you recognize he is writing to himself, In moments of extreme existential stress, it transforms into this incredibly intimate glimpse of a human being.
Someone desperately trying to keep his own moral compass intact.
Right, when the entire world is quite literally falling apart around him.
And because we know he's speaking to himself in these high-stakes moments, it means we can look at this text as like an emergency toolkit.
Yes, I love that framing.
We get to see the exact cognitive tools he relies on when the alarms are going off in his head. And one of the most prominent tools he reaches for, which really struck me in Book 8, is this intense, almost aggressive focus on the impermanence of absolutely everything.
Memento mori.
Exactly. In Book 8, Chapter 24, he writes out this long, specific list of dead people.
It's quite a list.
It is. He writes, Lucilla buried Verus. Then was Lucilla herself buried by others. So Secunda Maximus, then Secunda herself. So Epidemicanus, Diotimus, Antoninus Pius, Faustina.
Yeah.
He just goes on listing these people burying their loved ones and then immediately being buried themselves. Now, at first glance, making a list of dead friends and family sounds incredibly morbid.
To a modern reader, it absolutely sounds morbid. Yeah. Our current culture spends vast amounts of resources trying to hide from death, trying to deny aging, and attempting to sanitize the entire concept of impermanence.
We really don't like thinking about it.
Not at all. But what Marcus is practicing here is the ancient philosophical discipline of memento mori, the practice of remembering that you must die.
Right.
However, he isn't doing it out of a morbid obsession or, depression. He's doing it because it is a profoundly liberating cognitive reframe.
Liberating how?
Well, consider the names he lists. These aren't abstract historical figures to him. Verus was his adoptive brother and co-emperor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Faustina was his wife. Antoninus Pius was his adoptive father, the previous emperor.
So these are his actual people.
These were the titans of his personal and political world. He is reminding himself that everyone who was vastly important, everyone who held immense power, everyone who was praised, and everyone who was criticized, they are all gone.
Huh.
And therefore, the people currently vying for his favor or secretly plotting against him in the court right now will also soon be gone.
It kind of begs the ultimate question, doesn't it?
Exactly. If this entire drama is so fleeting, why am I agonizing over the opinions of people who will soon be dust?
I can really see how that perspective shift acts like a release valve for anxiety.
It takes the pressure right off.
Because when you are in the middle of a stressful day, the things someone said to you in a morning meeting feels like the most permanent, earth-shattering reality.
Totally.
Your brain treats a passive-aggressive email as if it is a permanent threat to your actual survival.
Fight or flight response right there.
Yeah. And Marcus is just zooming out. He's taking the camera and pulling it way, way back to a 1,000-year timeline.
Essentially saying, look at all these emperors and queens who turned to dust.
Right, like the guy from accounting who challenged your spreadsheet is also going to turn to dust.
It instantly deflates the ego's response to perceived threats.
Yeah.
And this leads directly into his central thesis on how he views the power of his own mind to handle those perceived threats. In Book 7, Chapter 13, he makes a really fascinating claim about the autonomy of the intellect.
Right, I have this passage highlighted, actually.
Oh, go ahead.
He says, my understanding that ruleth over all will not of itself bring trouble and vexation upon itself. And then he asks a question that honestly stopped me in my tracks.
What is it?
He says, for as for the body, why should I make the grief of my body to be the grief of my mind?
It's a powerful question.
It is, but I have to push back on this because this is where ancient philosophy often loses modern readers, myself included.
Fair enough. Let's hear it.
Why should I make the grief of my body to be the grief of my mind? That sounds superhuman to the point of being delusional.
I can see why you'd say that.
I mean, if I have a severe migraine or if I shatter my ankle playing basketball, my mind is definitely grieving. It hurts. I'm angry. I'm incapacitated. Is he just playing semantic games to gaslight himself into pretending things don't hurt?
That is the most crucial pushback you can offer. It really highlights one of the most common misunderstandings of Stoic philosophy.
Okay, set me straight.
People often assume Stoicism means suppressing your feelings, gritting your teeth, and pretending you aren't in pain.
The whole stiff upper lip thing.
Right, but that is a huge misreading. Marcus, drawing from a long tradition of Stoic epistemology, is making a highly precise, practically biological distinction here.
Between what?
Between raw physical sensation and the psychological narrative we construct around that sensation.
Okay, let's explore that biological distinction. How does the body's grief actually separate from the mind's grief in a real-world scenario, like my broken ankle example.
Perfect. Let's use the shattered ankle. When you break your ankle, the physical pain is a biological reality. The nerve endings fire, nociception occurs, the pain signals travel up your spinal cord to your brain, and you experience acute physical agony.
Oh, definitely.
Marcus is absolutely not denying that reality. The body grieves, the tissue is damaged.
Okay, so he admits the pain is real.
Yes. But the narrative that your mind immediately begins to spin is a completely separate process.
The narrative.
The suffering is the voice that says, this always happens to me. This completely ruins my summer. I'm going to lose my fitness. My friends are going to go on the hiking trip without me. Life is so unfair. The universe has it out for me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I know that voice very well.
We all do.
Yeah.
That entire cascade of catastrophic thought is an optional add-on. That is the mind choosing to grieve.
I see.
Pain is inevitable, biological data. Suffering is the novel we write about the data. The mind creates the suffering by how it interprets the pain.
So the pain is just the raw data packet arriving at the brain. But the suffering is the meaning I assign to the data packet.
Exactly.
The pain is ankle broken. The suffering is my life is ruined.
Exactly. And in Book 7, Chapter 2, he reinforces this boundary. He writes, those things that are without my understanding are nothing to it at all.
He's drawing a fortress wall.
A literal inner citadel. The external world, the broken ankle, the failing economy, the pandemic, the political crisis, those events happen outside the core ruling center of the mind.
Right.
The mind's only proper, controllable concern is how it chooses to judge those external events. If you choose not to judge the broken ankle as an absolute identity-destroying catastrophe, your inner citadel remains untouched. You protect the core of your reasoning self.
The inner citadel. You can have total chaos, war, and plague outside the walls, but inside the walls, the mind gets to decide what actually matters.
That's the goal.
But you know, what I find so deeply endearing about Marcus is that even with his profound intellectual understanding of the inner citadel, he still struggles with feeling like he's failing at it.
He is incredibly hard on himself.
He really is. Which brings us to a part of the text that feels intensely relatable today. In Book 8, Chapter 1, the most powerful man in the world essentially admits to having massive imposter syndrome.
It's amazing to read.
He writes to himself, thou hast done many things contrary to that perfection of life. Thou hast therefore been confounded in thy course, and henceforth it will be hard for thee to recover the title and credit of a philosopher.
So human.
He's looking in the mirror and saying, I have failed at being a good philosopher. I've messed up. Everyone knows I'm a fraud.
Right.
And then he lists the things he got distracted by. He says he wandered after syllogisms and logical subtleties, wealth, honor and reputation, pleasure.
Yeah.
What exactly does he mean by wandering after syllogisms and logical subtleties in a Roman context?
Well, in the ancient philosophical world, particularly in Athens and Rome, philosophy wasn't just a way of life. It was also a highly competitive academic sport.
A sport.
Oh, yeah. Syllogisms are formal logical arguments. Think of the classic, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Oh, okay.
There were professional philosophers, sophists, and rhetoricians who made their living and built immense social status by winning complex logical debates in public.
Almost like ancient debate bros.
Exactly like ancient debate bros. Marcus is critiquing himself for getting caught up in that academic trap. He is chastising himself for wanting to sound smart, for wanting to win the debate, for chasing the intellectual status of being a philosopher, rather than actually doing the hard, quiet work of living a virtuous life.
That translates so perfectly to the modern professional landscape. The parallels are almost uncomfortably precise.
How so?
Well, Marcus was distracted by wealth, honor, and sounding smart in the Roman court. Today, we chase the exact same phantoms.
That's true.
We wander after our own logical subtleties. We argue endlessly in Slack channels or on Twitter just to prove we're intellectually superior.
Just to win the argument for the sake of winning.
Right. We try to optimize our lives for social media aesthetics. We obsess over our job titles, our LinkedIn clout, the exact phrasing of our resumes.
The appearance of success.
Yes. We chase the mechanics and the appearance of success, rather than the substance of meaningful work. And just like Marcus, many people wake up mid-career and realize that none of this optimization, none of this status chasing has actually provided any internal stability.
It's the realization that you have successfully climbed a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall.
Yes.
And Marcus is remarkably blunt with himself about this realization. He recognizes the futility of complaining about the rules of a game he voluntarily entered.
Yeah.
In Book 8, Chapter 8, he delivers a very sharp, self-directed command. Forbear henceforth to complain of the trouble of a courtly life, either in public before others or in private by thyself.
I love that. He is telling himself to stop whining about his own life.
Exactly.
He's the emperor. The courtly life, with all its backstabbing and endless bureaucracy, is his reality. Complaining about it doesn't change a single thing. It only sours his own psychological state.
It's just wasted energy.
Think about how often we complain about the very careers or the very responsibilities that we fought tooth and nail to get.
Oh, all the time.
We interview for months to land the senior role. We take the promotion. We buy the larger house with the massive mortgage. We choose to have children. And then we spend a massive amount of our mental energy complaining about the stress of the direct reports, the emails, the mortgage payments, the lack of sleep.
It's so true.
Marcus is holding up a mirror and saying, you chose this path, or at the very least, this is the path you are currently standing on. Stop wasting energy complaining about the inherent conditions of the reality you inhabit.
Acceptance of the terrain is the prerequisite for navigating it.
That's a great way to put it.
And the way he frames how we should physically and mentally prepare for that terrain is one of the most brilliant metaphors in the entire Meditations.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
In Book 7, Chapter 33, he writes, "The art of true living in this world is more like a wrestler's than a dancer's practice."
That analogy completely rewired how I view my morning schedule.
Really? How
Yeah.
so?
Because I think the vast majority of us approach our days expecting to be dancers. It's like we walk out the front door expecting life to be this perfectly choreographed TikTok routine.
Everything exactly on beat.
Right. We expect the commute to take exactly 22 minutes because that's what the map app said. We expect our team to execute the project flawlessly, exactly as we envisioned it in our heads.
And what happens when they don't?
The second someone misses a step, the second there's an accident on the highway or a vendor misses a deadline, the entire dance is ruined, the music stops, and we get incredibly frustrated.
We feel wronged.
Exactly. But Marcus says, no, life isn't a dance. It's a wrestling match. To modernize it, it's not a synchronized swimming routine. It's a mixed martial arts fight in a cage where you have absolutely no idea what your opponent's next move is going to be.
The physical mechanics of those two arts perfectly illustrate his philosophical point. Think about it. A dancer requires a highly cooperative, predictable environment. To dance well, you need a flat, polished floor. You need music with a predictable tempo. You need a partner who has memorized the exact same choreography.
Right. Everything has to cooperate.
But a wrestler operates in an environment of total friction and opposition. A wrestler expects resistance.
They know they're going to get hit.
Right. A wrestler anticipates sudden, unpredictable force designed to throw them off balance. Therefore, a wrestler's primary physical skill is completely different from a dancer's.
How so?
A wrestler maintains a low center of gravity. They adopt a wide, stable stance rooted to the ground, entirely prepared to absorb unexpected shocks.
Ah.
When Marcus tells his mind to act like a wrestler, he is mentally lowering his center of gravity. He is preparing his intellect for unpredictable crises, for shifting alliances, for sudden conflict.
That makes so much sense.
If you wake up expecting a dance, an interruption feels like a profound injustice. But if you wake up expecting a wrestling match, an interruption is just another grapple to navigate. You don't get angry at the opponent for trying to throw you. That's literally the nature of the match.
That is such a crucial shift in expectation. You don't get angry at the opponent for trying to throw you. That's the nature of the match.
Exactly.
And that word nature leads us directly into what I consider the most difficult, most countercultural aspect of this entire philosophy.
I know where you're going with this.
Because Marcus constantly talks about accepting what is natural. In Book 8, Chapter 45, he writes, "Nothing can happen unto thee, which is not incidental unto thee, as thou art a man."
Yes.
He insists over and over that everything that happens is natural, and therefore we shouldn't be displeased by it.
And this bothers you.
I have to be honest, reading this, I felt a massive amount of internal resistance.
Okay, lay it out.
Because if we just accept everything as natural, if we accept that corporate greed is natural, or that systemic political corruption is natural, or that getting a devastating cancer diagnosis is natural, doesn't that fundamentally make us passive?
It's a very common reaction.
Doesn't this philosophy just kill human ambition? If everything is just the universe doing its natural thing, why should we invent vaccines or fight for civil rights or try to improve the world at all?
It is an incredibly vital question, and you are highlighting the exact point where modern sensibilities most violently collide with ancient Stoicism.
Okay, so I'm not the only one.
Not at all. We live in an era of hyper-optimization and technological solutionism. We believe fundamentally that if a problem exists, we have a moral imperative to engineer a solution to it.
Right. We want to fix things.
We believe we can and must master our environment, our biology, and our social structures. So when a modern listener hears a Roman emperor say, accept what is natural, it sounds synonymous with surrender.
It sounds like apathy.
It sounds like a justification for the status quo.
Exactly. It sounds like he's saying, the world is on fire, just let it burn because fire is natural.
But to understand why that interpretation is flawed, we have to separate emotional acceptance from behavioral passivity.
Emotional versus behavioral.
Okay.
Explain.
Look at the empirical evidence of Marcus Aurelius' actual life. Did he sit in his palace and do nothing while the plague raged and invaders crossed his borders?
Well, no, you said he was out there freezing in a tent.
Absolutely not. He was incredibly active. He sold off the imperial jewels to fund the treasury rather than overtax the citizens during a famine.
Oh, wow.
He spent years in freezing military camps, leading armies to protect the empire. He passed legislation attempting to improve the legal rights of slaves, orphans, and minors. He was deeply, exhaustingly engaged in trying to improve the world.
Okay, so he wasn't passive.
Not at all. So when he advocates for accepting what is natural, he is not advocating for behavioral passivity. He is advocating for emotional acceptance of reality as the absolute non-negotiable starting point for any effective action.
Okay, so emotional acceptance is the starting point. How does that translate to action? Give me a scenario where accepting the reality of a problem actually makes you better at solving it.
Think about it in terms of engineering or medicine. You cannot effectively fix a collapsing bridge if you are blinding yourself with rage that gravity exists, or screaming at the sky because steel degrades over time.
Right, you'd just be a terrible engineer.
Exactly. Gravity and degradation are natural. A surgeon cannot save a patient if they are throwing a temper tantrum about the existence of tumors.
That paints a very clear picture.
Marcus is saying, accept that the bridge collapsed, accept that the tumor exists, accept that political corruption is a historical reality of human systems. That is the nature of the world. These things occur.
So you stop fighting the reality of the situation.
Once you strip away the emotional indignation, the screaming, how dare this happen, or the world shouldn't be this way, you preserve your cognitive bandwidth.
I see.
You are now in a much stronger, clearer position to take right action. You fix the toxic workplace culture not out of a chaotic, uncontrollable rage, but out of a reasoned, steady duty to improve the environment for your team. You fight the injustice, not because you are surprised it exists, but because it is your duty as a rational human to combat it.
That completely flips the paradigm. It's not do nothing because it's natural. It's don't waste your limited, precious energy being shocked that reality is real.
Yes, exactly.
You need that energy to actually solve the problem. And he gives the most wonderfully mundane, incredibly practical example of this concept in Book 8, Chapter 48. This might be my absolute favorite passage.
The cucumber.
The cucumber, he writes, is the cucumber bitter? Set it away. Brambles are in the way. Avoid them. And then he delivers the punchline. Let this suffice. Add not presently speaking unto thyself what serve these things for in the world.
The bitter cucumber. It is a brilliant, almost humorous encapsulation of his entire cognitive framework.
It really is. Because you map that onto how we behave today. It reveals how ridiculous our modern outrage cycle is.
So true.
Our modern instinct, if we encounter a bitter cucumber, or let's use a real-world professional example, a highly passive-aggressive Slack message from a colleague that threatens to derail a project.
A very modern bramble.
A modern bramble, yes. Our instinct is not to just set it aside. Our instinct is to stare at the screen, take a screenshot, send it to 3 other coworkers, vent about how toxic this person is, agonize over the disrespect, and spend the entire weekend crafting a multi-paragraph, defensively worded reply.
We let it ruin our whole weekend.
Right. We add a massive emotional tax to a minor professional bramble. And Marcus just looks at us and says, is the Slack message unproductive? Ignore the tone and answer only the data.
Is the colleague a bramble? Route the project around them.
Stop asking the universe why passive-aggressive coworkers are allowed to exist in the corporate ecosystem. Just step around them.
The profound insight there is his explicit warning against adding narrative. Add not presently speaking unto thyself, what serve these things for in the world.
Don't demand explanations.
Do not demand that the universe explain itself to you. Do not demand that every minor annoyance, every rude person, every traffic jam justify its existence in the grand scheme of your life.
Because that's exhausting.
Because the moment you demand that reality conform to your preferences, you are setting yourself up for endless misery. You are declaring war on reality, and reality has a perfect, undefeated record.
I love that. Reality has a perfect, undefeated record.
But this brings us to a critical juncture in the text, where his specific justification for why things happen reveals a fundamental tension for the modern reader.
Right, because his underlying reasoning for why we should accept these things is rooted in a worldview, a cosmology, that most of us simply do not share today. He talks constantly about the gods, about providence, and about the universe having this deliberate, rational, interconnected plan. For instance, in Book 7, Chapter 6, he says, "For all things throughout, there is but one and the same order, and through all things, one and the same God, the same substance, and the same law."
It's very poetic.
It is, but what exactly is he referring to here? What is this same substance and same law?
He is referring to the Stoic concept of the logos. The Stoics believed that the universe was not just dead matter, but a living, rational organism.
Almost like the universe itself is conscious.
Exactly. They believed it was permeated by a divine organizing fire or breath, the logos, which structured everything according to perfect reason.
Okay.
In this view, everything that happens, no matter how tragic or painful it seems to an individual, is ultimately purposeful and good for the whole of the cosmos. It is a philosophy of strict providence.
So nothing is an accident.
Nothing. The bitter cucumber, the plague, the betrayal in the Stoic view, these are all necessary threads in a divinely orchestrated tapestry.
Okay, let's unpack this carefully.
Yeah.
Because that theological worldview is very specific to antiquity. So what does this all mean for someone who doesn't share that ancient theology?
It's the big question.
If a modern listener doesn't believe in the logos, if they don't believe that the universe has a specific divine plan, or that a tragic illness happens for a preordained reason, does this entire philosophy collapse? Do we have to buy into ancient Roman theology to use these tools?
That is the pivotal question of modern Stoicism, and it requires us to exercise wisdom with discernment. We have to separate the enduring psychological insights from the time-bound cosmology.
Can we actually do that?
The truly brilliant thing is that Marcus Aurelius himself provides the escape hatch.
Wait, really?
Yes, he anticipates this exact philosophical doubt. He lived in a vibrant intellectual world where the Stoic view was heavily contested. In Book 7, Chapter 22, he explores this very dichotomy.
What does he say?
He writes, "All things, saith he, are by certain order and appointment." That represents his own Stoic view of divine providence. But immediately after he writes, "And what if the elements only, either dispersion or the atoms?"
The atoms. Who's he referring to there? Is that the Epicurean view?
Exactly. He is explicitly contrasting the Stoic view of divine order with the physics of Epicurus.
And what did Epicurus believe?
Epicureanism taught that the universe was not guided by a divine logos, but was instead entirely composed of atoms randomly colliding and swerving in an infinite void.
So no grand plan.
Right. In the Epicurean view, there is no providence, no grand plan, and no divine justice. It is pure chance and physical mechanics.
So he is laying out the two opposing views of the universe. Divinely orchestrated purpose versus completely random chaos.
Yes. And his conclusion is stunning in its pragmatism. He's essentially saying it doesn't actually matter which cosmology is true when it comes to the practical application of your character.
How does it not matter?
Whether the universe is a beautifully orchestrated symphony of divine providence or just a chaotic, random collision of blind atoms in a void, the psychological tool and your moral imperative remain exactly the same.
Wow, okay.
Think about it. If it's providence, you accept it because it's part of the grand design. If it's random atoms, you accept it because getting angry at blind atoms is completely irrational.
I mean, you can't yell at an atom.
Exactly. Either way, you still have a mind. You still possess the capacity for reason. You still have a strict duty to act with justice, temperance, and charity towards your fellow human beings.
That's incredibly liberating.
We do not need to adopt Roman theology to utilize the emotional regulation techniques he's describing. The practical utility of the operating system survives the death of its original theological hardware.
That is so cool. It means we can extract this cognitive operating system and run it on a modern worldview.
Perfectly said.
And when you actually analyze that operating system, It is shocking how closely it aligns with other major wisdom traditions that developed entirely independently, as well as modern clinical psychology.
Oh, the overlaps are everywhere.
Let's look at Book 8, Chapter 47. He gives a very specific, almost clinical instruction to himself. He says, "Keep thyself to the first bare and naked apprehensions of things, as they present themselves unto thee, and add not unto them."
Yes.
And then he gives an example. "I see that my child is sick. That he is sick, I see, but that he is in danger of his life also, I see it not."
It's a very rigorous way of thinking.
It is. He is telling himself to observe a highly emotional event without attaching any speculative, catastrophic narrative to it. When I read that, I immediately thought of Buddhism. That is pure mindfulness practice.
The parallels are profound. What Marcus calls bare and naked apprehensions is strikingly similar to the Buddhist concept of avoiding the second arrow.
The second
Yeah. In Buddhist teaching, the first arrow is the unavoidable pain of life, the sickness, the injury, the loss. The second arrow is the suffering we inflict upon ourselves by our reaction to the pain.
the anxiety, the why me.
Right, the catastrophic projections into the future. The core of mindfulness meditation involves observing the present moment exactly as it is, noting a thought or a sensation, and then letting it pass without getting swept away by the narrative content of the thought.
Which is exactly what Marcus is doing.
Marcus is practicing the exact same cognitive discipline. He is stripping away the illusion of the future, keeping only to the bare facts at the present moment.
And it's not just ancient Eastern traditions either. Reading this, it felt like I was reading a textbook on cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is the gold standard of modern evidence-based psychology.
It really is.
In CBT, therapists teach patients to identify cognitive distortions, things like catastrophizing, mind reading, or jumping to conclusions, and then train them to actively reframe those thoughts based on actual observable evidence. Marcus is doing exactly this in Book 8, Chapter 40.
He's remarkably ahead of his time.
He writes, "If thou didst propose, without due reservation and exception, now hath thy reasonable part received a blow. But if in general thou didst propose unto thyself whatsoever might be, thou art not thereby either hurt nor properly hindered."
Yeah.
He's talking about how rigid expectations set you up for psychological injury, and how flexible, realistic expectations protect your mind.
He is outlining the fundamental premise of cognitive therapy 2,000 years before Dr. Aaron Beck formalized it in the 1960s.
Wow.
Beck's cognitive model posits that it is not external events that cause our emotional distress, but rather our thoughts and beliefs about those events.
Which maps perfectly to the inner citadel concept.
Exactly. When Marcus talks about receiving a blow, we can map that directly onto modern neuroscience. When you encounter an obstacle that violates your rigid expectations, your brain perceives a threat.
The fight or flight response.
Right. The amygdala activates, triggering the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline. You experience stress, anger, and anxiety.
Right, and you feel terrible.
But when Marcus practices due reservation, when he anticipates obstacles and strips away the catastrophic narrative, he is using his prefrontal cortex to exert top-down control over the amygdala.
He's literally changing his brain chemistry.
Yes, by consciously reframing his thoughts to align with reality, he halts the stress response and keeps himself unhindered. Modern neuroscience and psychology have essentially validated the biological efficacy of his diary entries.
That is absolutely wild. The Emperor of Rome was essentially performing self-guided CBT in a freezing tent to lower his own cortisol levels so he wouldn't snap and execute his generals.
That's a very accurate summary.
But I want to make sure we don't just leave this in the realm of fascinating theory. I want to translate this massive philosophical and biological framework into practical action for the listener.
Let's do it.
If we take all of this, the wrestler mindset, the acceptance of nature, the bare apprehensions, how does someone actually implement that when they are facing a stressful day tomorrow morning?
Great question.
Let's say a listener is heading to the airport for a crucial business meeting, and their flight is abruptly delayed by 4 hours. The meeting is in jeopardy. The biological stress response kicks in.
Oh.
How do they apply the bitter cucumber pivot in that moment?
The airport scenario is the perfect modern testing ground. When that delay is announced, the initial biological reaction, the frustration, is entirely natural.
You're going to feel it.
You will feel it. But to apply the pivot, you must intercept the narrative before the suffering begins. First, acknowledge the bare apprehension. The flight is delayed 4 hours. That is the data.
Just the data.
Second, step around the bramble, practically. Get in line for rebooking, call the client, look for alternate routes.
Do what you can.
Right. But the crucial transformative step is the cognitive pivot. You must actively forbid the victim narrative. You stop the internal monologue that says, airlines are terrible, this always happens to me, the client is going to fire us, my career is ruined.
Right, don't write the novel.
It is not a cosmic conspiracy against your career. It is just a logistical failure in a complex aviation system. It is a bitter cucumber. You manage the logistics, but you refuse to pay the emotional tax.
You manage the logistics, but refuse to pay the emotional tax. I love that frame.
It's empowering.
Now, what about dealing with difficult people? The delayed flight is an inanimate system. But what if the obstacle is a highly hostile, uncooperative person? Let's look at Book 8, Chapter 54, where Marcus uses the analogy of the sunbeam.
The sunbeam mindset is one of his most beautiful and practical metaphors for interpersonal conflict.
How does he describe it?
Marcus notes that sunlight is poured out, it is diffused everywhere, but it isn't emptied out. And crucially, when a sunbeam hits a solid, opaque object like a wall or an obstacle, it doesn't violently try to crash through it.
What does it do?
It stops, it holds its ground, and it illuminates whatever it has hit. He uses specific Latin-derived concepts here, contrasting effusion, which is a chaotic, uncontrollable spilling over, with extension, which is a steady stretching out and resting upon.
So how does that look in a tense negotiation? Or when dealing with a furious client who is screaming at you over a mistake?
When you are faced with a hostile person, the instinct is to crash into them with equal force. You want to match their anger.
Right, you want to yell back.
That is an effusion, a chaotic spilling over of your emotional energy that compromises your own character.
So what's the alternative?
The sunbeam mindset says, stop, do not crash into their anger, hold your ground, maintain your steady, low wrestler's stance, and simply shine your own light of reason, patience, and professional boundaries onto the situation.
Just illuminate it.
You illuminate the problem without letting their hostility corrupt your inner citadel. If they refuse your light and remain stubborn, as Marcus notes, that is their own loss. But you remain steady, you remain a sunbeam.
Don't fight the wall, just shine on it.
Exactly.
And for the final piece of the toolkit, we have to talk about how to intercept the stories we tell ourselves before they spiral out of control. We talked about CBT and the bear apprehensions. What is the specific question listeners should ask themselves to execute this?
It is the interrogation of impressions.
Okay, how does that work?
Before you react to bad news, before you send the angry email, pause and ask yourself two distinct questions. First, what is the undeniable, objective fact of what is happening right now? And second, what is the speculative story I am adding to that fact?
So, returning to the boss who hasn't replied to the crucial email for 24 hours.
Perfect example.
The speculative story is, they hate my proposal, they think I'm incompetent, I'm getting passed over for the promotion. That is the narrative spiking your cortisol.
It's all fiction.
Right, but if you run the interrogation of impressions, you strip it down to the bare facts.
Yeah.
The objective fact is simply, an email has not received a reply. That is the only truth. They could be in back-to-back meetings. They could be dealing with a family emergency. The email could be stuck in an outbox. By separating the single bare fact from the catastrophic fiction, you save yourself hours or even days of unnecessary psychological torment.
Exactly. Traffic is just metal boxes on asphalt. An unreturned text is just a lack of pixels on a screen. A bitter cucumber is just a vegetable with an unpleasant taste.
It's just what it is.
When you strip away the heavy, suffocating narratives we attach to these events, it completely changes how you interact with the friction of a normal day. It takes the existential weight out of minor inconveniences and leaves you anchored firmly in reality with your cognitive energy fully intact.
It leaves you anchored in reality. I think that's a perfect place to land.
It's been a great discussion.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over as you transition back into the demands of your day. Tonight, I want you to literally pull up your calendar for tomorrow. Look at the meetings, the calls, the errands, the family obligations you have scheduled.
The whole day.
As you look at that schedule, ask yourself, which of those events are you approaching like a dancer? Where are you secretly expecting a perfect, flawless, frictionless routine from the universe and the people around you?
And how can you shift?
Right. How can you shift your mindset right now to the wrestler? How can you wake up tomorrow morning ready to lower your center of gravity, find your balance, and be totally prepared for whatever unexpected challenge hits the mat? That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.